What if I told you that one of the 1980s most beloved westerns was almost never made? Features a Monty Python star as a sheriff and was built on a ranch discovered by pure accident. From Kevin Costner's career-saving role after being cut from another major film to a horse wearing a cowboy hat as a deliberate gag, Silverado hides fascinating secrets beneath its classic Western exterior. The film's massive set has become Hollywood's go-to Wild West town, while its Oscar-nominated score came from a composer who had only written music for 2 previous movies. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Silverado. Fact 1. Kevin Costner's consolation prize role. Sometimes the best opportunities come from the worst disappointments, and Kevin Costner's starring role in Silverado is a perfect example of this Hollywood truth. The part of Jake, the wild and acrobatic younger brother who steals every scene he's in, was written specifically for Costner by director Lawrence Kasdan after one of the most painful experiences of the actor's early career. In 1983, Costner had been cast in what he thought would be his big break, playing a character named Alex in Kasdan's ensemble drama, The Big Chill. Alex was the friend whose suicide brings the rest of the cast together for a reunion weekend, and Costner filmed several flashback scenes that were meant to show the character's relationship with his college friends. The young actor was thrilled to be working with such an acclaimed director and talented cast, believing this would be his ticket to stardom. However, when Kasdan reached the editing room, he made the brutal decision to cut all of Costner's scenes from the final film. Alex became a character who appears only as a corpse in the opening sequence, with just a few seconds of screen time. For Costner, watching his breakthrough role disappear was devastating, leaving him with almost nothing to show for months of work on what became a critically acclaimed and commercially successful film. But Kasdan recognized the talent he had seen in the young actor during those deleted scenes, and he felt guilty about cutting Costner's performance entirely. When the director began developing his Western project Silverado with his brother Mark, he deliberately crafted the character of Jake with Costner in mind. The role was designed to be a scene-stealing, attention-grabbing performance that would showcase everything Kasdan had seen in the actor during The Big Chill. Jake became Costner's true breakthrough role, launching him toward the stardom that The Big Chill had promised but failed to deliver. Kasdan's decision to give Costner a second chance transformed what could have been a career-ending disappointment into the foundation of one of Hollywood's most successful careers in the 1980s and 90s. Fact 2. John Cleese's serious Western sheriff. One of the most unexpected casting choices in Silverado was having John Cleese, the towering British comedian famous for Monty Python and Fawlty Towers, play a completely serious Wild West sheriff without any hint of his usual comedic antics. What makes this casting even more surprising is that Cleese delivered his entire performance in his natural British accent, making no attempt to sound like an American lawman from the 1880s. Cleese plays Sheriff John Langston, a no-nonsense lawman who encounters the heroes in the town of Turley early in the film. Rather than trying to hide his distinctive English voice or play the role for laughs, Cleese committed fully to portraying Langston as a legitimate authority figure who simply happens to be British. The character acknowledges his foreign origins with the self-aware line, "As you may have guessed, I am not from these parts," which allows the film to address the obvious without making it a joke. The most delightful moment for Python fans comes when Cleese delivers the line, "What's all this then?" during a tense confrontation, which was a direct nod to his comedy background, since this phrase was one of his signature catchphrases from Monty Python sketches. However, even this reference is played completely straight within the context of the Western, maintaining the serious tone of the scene while giving longtime fans a subtle wink. What's remarkable about Cleese's performance is how well it actually works within the film's world. His commanding presence and natural authority make him believable as a frontier sheriff, and his British accent adds an interesting layer of authenticity, since many real frontier towns did have immigrant lawmen from various countries. The casting could have been a disaster or a distraction, but instead it becomes one of the film's most memorable supporting performances. Cleese himself described this as one of the most serious, dramatic roles he had ever taken at that point in his career, and many critics noted how effectively he managed to disappear into the character despite his fame as a comedian. Fact 3. The horse wore Jake's hat. One of the most charming moments in Silverado came about through pure spontaneity when Kevin Costner had a last-minute idea that perfectly captured his character's playful personality. In the scene where the bumbling character Augie tries to jump onto Jake's horse and ends up falling to the ground instead, viewers can spot something delightfully absurd if they look closely at the horse during the tumble. The scene was originally scripted as a straightforward bit of physical comedy, with Augie attempting to mount Jake's horse in a moment of excitement, but failing spectacularly and hitting the dirt. However, just before the cameras started rolling, Costner noticed his character's hat sitting nearby and had a sudden inspiration that would add an extra layer of humor to the moment. Costner suggested to director Lawrence Kasdan that they should put Jake's hat on the horse's head during the scene, reasoning that it would be exactly the kind of goofy, unexpected touch that fit with his character's mischievous and carefree nature. The idea was that Jake would be the type of person who might playfully dress up his horse, even in the middle of serious frontier business. Kasdan immediately loved the suggestion because it perfectly embodied the spirit of fun that he wanted to bring to the Western genre while still maintaining the film's authentic feel. The director recognized that this small detail would give audiences an extra reason to smile and would demonstrate Jake's personality without requiring any additional dialogue or explanation. The moment made it into the final cut exactly as Costner had envisioned it, and the sight of the horse wearing a cowboy hat during Augie's comedic pratfall became one of those delightful background details that reward attentive viewers. This spontaneous creative decision reflects the collaborative atmosphere on set and shows how the best movie moments sometimes come from actors who are fully invested in their characters and willing to contribute ideas that enhance the story. Fact 4. Accidental ranch discovery by helicopter. The entire town of Silverado might never have existed if not for a chance helicopter ride over the New Mexico desert in 1984, when location scouts literally stumbled upon what would become one of Hollywood's most famous Western movie sets. Director Lawrence Kasdan and his brother Mark were flying over remote areas of New Mexico, desperately searching for the perfect spot to build their fictional frontier town, when they spotted a ranch that seemed to offer exactly what they needed. The property belonged to Bill and Marion Cook, who owned several ranches across New Mexico and Arizona and had been considering how to make better economic use of their land. When the film's location manager knocked on their door, he made what seemed like a simple request, asking if they could do a little shooting on the property and offering to build just 2 or 3 small structures for the production. Bill Cook later recalled the casual nature of that first conversation, explaining that there wasn't any great motivation for him one way or another, but he figured there was no harm in saying yes to what appeared to be a modest film project. The location manager offered Cook what he described as a casual number, as a location fee, suggesting this would be a small, low-budget operation that wouldn't disrupt ranch life very much. However, what started as a request for a few simple buildings quickly grew into something far more elaborate and expensive than anyone had originally imagined. Cook watched in amazement as his quiet ranch property was transformed into a complete Western town featuring 38 storefronts, a church, a working saloon, and a sheriff's office with a functional jail, all built to movie-quality standards that would allow for both exterior and interior filming. The ranch owner found himself hosting a major Hollywood production with a significant budget, accomplished actors, and a large crew, turning his accidental yes into a decision that would change his property forever and create a movie set that continues to be used by productions today. Fact 5. The wrong flag in the wrong century. Movie fans with keen eyes for historical detail can catch a glaring anachronism hanging right in plain sight during some of the most dramatic moments in Silverado, where a modern American flag appears in scenes set nearly 70 years before it should have existed. The flag in question features all 50 stars representing the current United States, but the film takes place in 1880, when the country looked very different on the map. The problematic flag appears most prominently during the climactic gunfight between Payton and Sheriff Cobb, hanging from a building in the background as the two men face off in their final showdown. It also shows up in the closing scenes of the film, where it waves in the breeze as a symbol of law and order being restored to the frontier town, completely unaware that it's displaying the wrong version of American history. In 1880, when Silverado is set, the United States had only 38 states, which means the flag should have displayed 38 stars arranged in neat rows across the blue field. The 38th state was Colorado, which joined the Union in 1876, just 4 years before the film's timeline. At that point in American history, large territories like New Mexico, Arizona, Oklahoma, and Alaska were still waiting for statehood, and Hawaii wouldn't even become a U.S. territory until 1898. The 50-star flag that appears in the movie wasn't adopted until July 4, 1960, when Hawaii became the 50th state and completed the modern configuration that we know today. This means the flag shown in Silverado is displaying 12 extra states that didn't exist during the supposed time period, including Alaska and Hawaii, which were still decades away from even being considered for statehood. This type of flag error is surprisingly common in Western movies, where modern props sometimes slip through the attention of busy production crews who are focused on bigger picture elements like costumes, dialogue, and action sequences, but it's particularly noticeable in a film that otherwise pays careful attention to period details and historical authenticity. Fact 6. 4 different horses played one character. One of the most amusing continuity errors in Silverado involves Kevin Kline's character Peyton and his supposedly beloved horse, which the gunslinger makes a huge emotional fuss about throughout the entire movie, despite the fact that the production team used 4 completely different horses with distinctly different markings to play the same animal. This creates a rather ironic situation where Peyton talks passionately about his specific bay mare, while audiences unknowingly watch him riding several different horses that look nothing alike. The horse mix-up becomes particularly noticeable to viewers who pay close attention to the animal's physical characteristics, since each of the 4 horses had unique coat patterns, facial markings, and body builds that should have made them impossible to mistake for the same animal. In Western movies, it's actually quite common for productions to use multiple horses to portray a single character, since different horses have different skills and temperaments that make them better suited for specific types of scenes, such as running sequences, close-up shots, or stunt work. However, most productions take great care to choose horses that look as similar as possible, or they use makeup and other techniques to ensure the animals appear identical on screen. The Silverado production team seems to have been less concerned with this type of visual consistency, perhaps because they were focused on more complex elements of the large-scale Western production and didn't expect audiences to scrutinize the horses quite so closely. Interestingly, the production did a much better job matching the horses used for Kevin Costner's character Jake, even though his Pinto horse presented a more challenging color pattern to replicate consistently. Pinto horses have distinctive black and white markings that are much more obvious than the subtle variations in bay horses, which made it harder to find similar-looking animals, but apparently motivated the crew to put more effort into maintaining visual continuity for that particular character's mount. The horse continuity errors also extend to Danny Glover's character, whose horse mysteriously changes from a sorrel or reddish-brown color to a bay or brown color between different scenes. Fact 7. The set that keeps on giving. The impressive Western town built for Silverado turned out to be one of the most successful and long-lasting movie sets in Hollywood history, appearing in more than 30 major film and television productions over the decades since its construction in 1984. What started as a temporary set for a single Western movie became Hollywood's go-to location whenever directors needed an authentic-looking frontier town, making it far more famous and profitable than anyone originally imagined. Some of the biggest Western productions of the past 40 years have used the Silverado set as their primary location, including Young Guns in 1988, Kevin Costner's epic Wyatt Earp in 1994, the beloved television miniseries Lonesome Dove in 1989, and All the Pretty Horses in 2000. The set has been so popular that it's been expanded and modified multiple times to accommodate different productions, with directors adding new buildings or changing existing structures to fit their specific storytelling needs. Perhaps the most surprising production to use the Western town was Marvel's Thor in 2011, proving that the set's versatility extends far beyond traditional cowboy movies. The buildings have also appeared in the steampunk Western Wild Wild West in 1999, where filmmakers included a delightful Easter egg as a tribute to the original Silverado director by adding Kasdan Ironworks signage to one of the buildings. The set's continued popularity stems from both its authentic construction and its convenient location at what is now called Cerro Pelon Ranch in New Mexico, about 30 miles from Santa Fe. Unlike many movie sets that are built as simple facades, the Silverado buildings were constructed as fully functional structures with working interiors, making them suitable for both exterior shots and indoor scenes. The ranch's remote location and stunning natural scenery, surrounded by mountains and desert landscapes, provide the perfect backdrop for any Western production, while the existing infrastructure saves filmmakers the enormous cost and time required to build their own frontier towns from scratch. Fact 8. Bruce Broughton's career, making third score. The sweeping orchestral music that makes Silverado so memorable and earned an Academy Award nomination came from a composer who had written music for only 2 previous movies in his entire career, making this one of the most impressive early achievements in film scoring history. Bruce Broughton was 39 years old when he created what many consider to be one of the greatest Western scores ever written, despite having virtually no experience composing music for major motion pictures. At the time Lawrence Kasdan hired him, Broughton was primarily known as a television composer who had built his reputation writing music for popular shows like Hawaii Five-0, Dallas, and Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. His only theatrical film experience consisted of 2 small projects called The Prodigal in 1983 and The Ice Pirates, 1984, neither of which had given him the opportunity to work with large orchestras or create the kind of epic, sweeping themes that would define his Silverado score. Broughton got the job through his agent, who suggested he meet with Kasdan, even though it seemed like a long shot for such an inexperienced film composer. The interview was supposed to last 30 minutes but stretched to an hour and a half, as Kasdan became impressed with Broughton's passion for the project and his understanding of what the director wanted to achieve with the music. What made Broughton's approach unique was his decision to use a full symphony orchestra instead of the smaller, more traditional Western ensembles that most composers employed for cowboy movies. While other Western scores often featured harmonicas, guitars, and smaller instrumental groups to create an authentic frontier sound, Broughton chose to give his music the grand, classical treatment typically reserved for epic dramas or adventure films. This bold choice helped create the film's distinctive sound and contributed to the score's lasting popularity, with the main theme becoming so well known that it's frequently played at sporting events around the world. Fact 9. Linda Hunt's unique Western casting. One of the most unconventional casting decisions in Silverado was hiring Linda Hunt to play Stella, the tough and savvy saloon owner who becomes a key ally to the heroes, making her one of the most unusual choices for a Western character in film history. Hunt was fresh off her groundbreaking Academy Award win for Best Supporting Actress in 1983 for The Year of Living Dangerously, where she had made history by becoming the first person to win an Oscar for playing a character of the opposite sex, portraying a male Chinese-Australian photographer named Billy Kwan. Hunt's casting in Silverado was remarkable because she brought a completely different energy and presence to the Western genre than audiences had ever seen before. At 4 feet 9 inches tall, and with a distinctive, resonant voice that commanded attention despite her small stature, Hunt created a saloon owner who was both unexpected and completely believable within the film's world. Her character Stella serves as the unofficial information broker and power player in the town of Silverado, someone who knows everyone's secrets and isn't afraid to use that knowledge when necessary. What made Hunt's performance particularly effective was how naturally she fit into the ensemble cast, despite being such an unconventional choice for a frontier woman. Her scenes with Kevin Kline's character Payton crackle with intelligence and wit, creating a dynamic that feels both authentic to the Old West setting and refreshingly different from typical Western female characters. Hunt brought a sense of authority and worldliness to Stella that suggested this was a woman who had seen everything and survived by being smarter and tougher than anyone expected. The casting also reflected director Lawrence Kasdan's commitment to finding the best actors for his roles, regardless of whether they fit traditional Western archetypes. Hunt's presence in the film, along with other unexpected casting choices, helped give Silverado a unique personality that set it apart from more conventional cowboy movies, while still honoring the classic elements of the genre. Fact 10. CMT's mysterious incomplete version. One of the strangest mysteries surrounding Silverado involves the version that aired on country music television, or CMT, which bizarrely cuts off the entire climactic portion of the film and ends at a completely random moment that leaves viewers hanging without any resolution to the story. This truncated version stops right as the 4 heroes are leaving the McKendrick Ranch after rescuing young Augie, which means audiences never get to see the final showdown in the town of Silverado that gives the movie its title and provides the satisfying conclusion to all the character storylines. The CMT version essentially ends the film at what should be the beginning of the 3rd act, cutting out approximately 30 minutes of crucial footage that includes Payton's confrontation with his former partner Cobb, Jake's dramatic entrance into the saloon to face his enemies, Emmett's final battle with the McKendrick gang, and Mal's resolution of his family's land dispute. Without these scenes, viewers are left with a movie that builds up multiple conflicts and character arcs, but never delivers on any of the promises made in the first two-thirds of the story. What makes this editing decision even more puzzling is that CMT never provided any explanation for why they chose to broadcast such a severely abbreviated version of the film. The missing footage doesn't contain any content that would obviously violate television standards, since the violence and language in the final act are consistent with what appears in the rest of the movie that CMT chose to air. The cut also doesn't seem to be related to time constraints, since many television networks routinely edit films to fit specific programming blocks without removing entire storylines. The result is a viewing experience that must be incredibly frustrating for anyone who watches Silverado on CMT, expecting to see the complete story, particularly since the film builds toward its climactic showdowns throughout the entire running time. This mysterious editing choice has become something of a legend among Western movie fans who have encountered the incomplete version and wondered why anyone would choose to broadcast such a fundamentally unsatisfying cut of the film. Fact 11. Contrails in the 1880s sky. Sharp-eyed viewers who watch Silverado carefully can spot one of the most glaring anachronisms in the entire film when a modern jet aircraft contrail appears clearly visible in the sky during a scene that's supposed to take place in 1880, nearly 60 years before powered flight was even invented. This obvious mistake occurs around the 13-minute mark of the film, streaking across the supposedly pristine frontier sky like a white line that definitely doesn't belong in the Old West. Contrails, which are the visible trails of water vapor that form behind high-altitude aircraft, represent technology that wouldn't exist for decades after the film's setting. The Wright brothers didn't achieve their first powered flight until 1903, and commercial aviation didn't develop until much later in the 20th century. Even if some form of experimental aircraft had existed in 1880, which it didn't, it wouldn't have been capable of flying at the high altitudes necessary to create the distinctive contrail visible in the movie. This type of mistake is surprisingly common in period films, especially those shot in remote outdoor locations where it's difficult to control every element of the environment during filming. When production crews are focused on managing complex scenes with multiple actors, horses, and elaborate camera movements, it's easy to miss something happening in the background sky, particularly since contrails often don't appear immediately after an aircraft passes overhead. The contrail error is particularly noticeable in Silverado because the film was shot in the wide-open spaces of New Mexico, where the vast sky occupies a significant portion of many shots and provides a dramatic backdrop for the Western action. The clear desert air and bright sunlight that make the location so visually stunning also make any modern intrusions like aircraft trails stand out more obviously than they might in other environments. What makes this blooper even more amusing is that it appears during a scene meant to emphasize the untamed, pristine nature of the American frontier, where the characters are experiencing the kind of vast, unspoiled landscape that existed before modern civilization changed the world forever. Fact 12. The modern glass windows mistake. Throughout Silverado, viewers can see perfectly flat and uniform window glass in the buildings of the frontier town, but this smooth, modern glazing represents technology that wouldn't be invented for several decades after the film's 1880 setting. The windows throughout the movie feature what's called float glass, a type of perfectly flat, clear glass that's made using an industrial process developed in the 1950s, making it about 70 years too advanced for the supposed time period. In 1880, when the film takes place, all window glass was made using a much more primitive method called the cylinder process, which involved skilled glassworkers blowing molten glass into large cylindrical shapes by hand. After the glass cooled, workers would cut the cylinders down one side in a straight line, then reheat the glass and carefully flatten it out into individual window panes, a labor-intensive process that created glass with distinctive wavy, irregular surfaces that distorted reflections and views. This hand-blown cylinder glass had a completely different appearance from modern window glass, with visible ripples, bubbles, and thickness variations that gave it character and made it obviously different from the perfectly smooth glazing that appears in Silverado. The imperfections in authentic 1880s glass were actually quite beautiful and added to the rustic charm of frontier buildings, but they also made the glass much more expensive and difficult to produce than modern alternatives. The float glass process that created the windows visible in Silverado involves floating molten glass on a bed of liquid tin, which creates a perfectly flat surface that's impossible to achieve through hand-blowing techniques. This modern method allows manufacturers to produce large sheets of uniform glass quickly and cheaply, which is why it became the standard for all window production in the 20th century. The mistake is understandable from a practical filmmaking perspective, since using authentic period glass would have been extremely expensive and difficult to source in the quantities needed for an entire movie town, but it's still a noticeable anachronism for viewers who know what to look for in historical details. Fact 13. The impossible 1922 windmill, one of the most prominent anachronisms in Silverado, appears in multiple scenes throughout the film, where a distinctive windmill stands as a landmark in the frontier landscape. But this particular model represents technology that wouldn't be invented until 1922, putting it about 4 decades ahead of the movie's 1880 timeline. The windmill in question is a Dempster No. 12 Annu-Oil model, which features a specific design and oil lubrication system that makes it easily identifiable to anyone familiar with windmill history. The Dempster Manufacturing Company was indeed a real windmill producer that operated during the late 1800s, so having a Dempster windmill in an 1880 Western setting would actually be historically appropriate, but the specific model used in Silverado represents a much later advancement in windmill technology. The No. 12 Annu-Oil featured an automatic oiling system that was a significant improvement over earlier windmill designs, which required manual lubrication and much more frequent maintenance to keep the mechanical parts working properly. In 1880, the windmills available to frontier settlers were much more basic designs that used simpler bearing systems and required constant attention from their owners to keep them functioning in the harsh conditions of the American West. These earlier windmills were essential for pumping water from underground wells, making them crucial pieces of equipment for ranchers and farmers who needed reliable access to water for their livestock and crops in areas where surface water was scarce. The windmill appears prominently in several key scenes throughout Silverado, serving as both a visual landmark that helps establish the frontier setting and a practical element that demonstrates how settlers adapted to life in the arid landscapes of the West. However, its advanced design represents the kind of technological improvement that came decades later as windmill manufacturers refined their products based on years of experience with the challenges of frontier life. This type of anachronistic prop is particularly common in Western movies, where filmmakers often use whatever equipment is readily available, rather than seeking out authentic period pieces that would be much more expensive and difficult to obtain for production purposes. Fact 14. From 2 buildings to Hollywood Town. What began as a modest request to construct just 2 or 3 simple buildings on Bill Cook's New Mexico ranch quickly spiraled into one of the most elaborate and expensive set constructions in Western movie history, ultimately creating a complete frontier town with 38 individual storefronts that far exceeded anyone's original plans or budget expectations. The transformation from a small-scale filming location to a major Hollywood production set happened so gradually that even the filmmakers were surprised by how massive the project became. When Lawrence Kasdan's location manager first approached Cook about using his property, the initial proposal was refreshingly straightforward and seemed like it would have minimal impact on the ranch operations. The production team explained that they needed to build a few basic structures to serve as background elements for their Western movie, offering what Cook described as a casual number as compensation for the temporary use of his land. However, as the Kasdan brothers and their production team began planning their scenes in more detail, they realized that their vision for Silverado required a much more comprehensive and authentic-looking frontier settlement than a few simple buildings could provide. The script called for multiple interior scenes that would need working buildings rather than just facades, and the sweeping camera movements that cinematographer John Bailey had planned would reveal more of the town than the original minimal set could accommodate. The final construction included not only the 38 storefronts that lined the main street, but also a fully functional church, a working saloon with a complete interior that could accommodate complex scenes with multiple actors, and a sheriff's office and jail that featured practical cells and authentic-looking law enforcement equipment. The buildings were constructed as 3-dimensional structures rather than simple movie facades, which meant they required foundations, complete roofing, and interior framework that could support the weight of cast and crew during filming. This massive expansion turned what had started as a minor location fee for Cook into a significant financial windfall, while transforming his quiet ranch into a bustling movie production facility that would continue generating income for decades to come. Fact 15. The crew's invisible family members. Director Lawrence Kasdan turned the production of Silverado into something of a family affair by quietly casting several of his own relatives in small but memorable roles throughout the film, creating a behind-the-scenes story that most viewers never notice despite these family members appearing on screen in multiple scenes. This practice of giving family members minor parts in movies is fairly common among Hollywood directors, but Kasdan was particularly generous in finding roles for his loved ones during the New Mexico production. The most prominent family casting involved Kasdan's two young sons, who both received speaking parts that required them to interact with the main characters in important scenes. Jonathan Kasdan, who was credited as John Kasdan in the film, plays a boy at the cavalry outpost early in the movie, appearing in the scene where Emmett and Peyton first encounter the military post and begin to understand the complex political situation they're walking into. Jake Kasdan, who was credited under his full name Jacob Kasdan, plays a stable boy who has a brief but memorable interaction with the heroes when they arrive in one of the frontier towns. Interestingly, Jake Kasdan would go on to become a successful director himself, eventually helming major Hollywood productions like Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, and Jumanji: The Next Level, making his small childhood appearance in Silverado an early step in what became a prominent filmmaking career. Lawrence Kasdan also found a role for his wife Meg, who appears as a barmaid in one of the saloon scenes, blending seamlessly into the background action while contributing to the authentic frontier atmosphere that the production team worked so hard to create. These family cameos represent a common practice among directors who want to share the experience of movie making with their loved ones while also having trusted people available to fill small roles that might otherwise require hiring additional actors. The Kasdan family's involvement in Silverado reflects the collaborative and personal nature of the production, where the director was able to combine his professional filmmaking goals with the opportunity to create lasting memories with his family members.